Today at 1, the West again warns Moscow any Ukraine invasion will cause massive sanctions, seriously affecting Russia's economy. More shuttle diplomacy today as European leaders visit Ukraine, with Boris Johnson warning an invasion could be imminent.
The signs are, as you've heard from President Biden, that they're at least planning for something that could take place as early as in the next 48 hours.
We'll be live in Kiev and Moscow. Also on the programme, the search for truth. The public inquiry into the wrongful convictions of hundreds of sub-postmasters accused of theft begins today.
We need compensation for everybody. We need justice for everyone. We need some people to at least face the consequences of what they've done to us.
Ghostbusters.
Hey, anybody see a ghost? And Ivan Reitman, director of comedy hits like Ghostbusters, has died. He was 75.
And coming up in sport on the BBC News Channel, a glimmer of hope for a medal for Team GB in Beijing as Kirsty Muir and Katie Summerhayes make it through to the slopestyle final.
Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. As tensions rise over a possible Russian invasion of Ukraine, Western nations have again made it clear to Moscow that any military action will result in massive sanctions that would have serious consequences for the Russian economy. The G7 group of the world's most developed countries, including Britain, made the warning as a spokesman for Ukraine's president insisted his country's ambition is still to join NATO, as set out in its constitution, despite the Ukrainian ambassador to Britain suggesting otherwise, as a means of avoiding war. Russia has long wanted Ukraine to drop its desire to join the military alliance. Well, Moscow now has up to 130,000 troops encircling Ukraine, but maintains it has no plans to invade. Our diplomatic correspondent James Landale has the very latest.
Kiev this morning, another day in a cosmopolitan European capital, normal life continuing despite the dire warnings of invasion. But is this the calm before the storm?
Hello, Mr. Chancellor.
Olaf Scholz, Germany's new chancellor, hopes not. He arrived in Ukraine for talks with the country's president. He's due in Moscow tomorrow to see President Putin. Looking for ways out of a confrontation the West fears could end in Russian invasion. European leaders say the threat is real and could affect the whole of Europe.
I think it's extremely serious, and tensions are very high because, as you heard already, Russian forces are at the Ukrainian border at a high readiness, and there are more than 100,000 of them.
Ukraine has summoned Russian officials to a meeting of the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe to explain its military build-up. Last night, Ukraine's ambassador in London suggested one possible concession. He told the BBC his country might give up the goal of NATO membership to avert war. This morning, he took it all back.
We are not a member of NATO right now, and to avoid war we are ready for many concessions, and that's what we are doing in our conversations with Russians. But it has nothing to do with NATO, which is enshrined in the Constitution.
The Kremlin, which says Russia's security would be threatened by Ukraine joining NATO, said abandoning the goal would help address its concerns. But a spokesman said Russia-US relations were on the floor. The Prime Minister in Scotland today is due to visit more European capitals this week to show his support for NATO allies. Downing Street said he was also considering further economic and defensive support for Ukraine.
The signs are, as you've heard from President Biden, that they're at least planning for something that could take place as early as in the next 48 hours. That is extremely concerning.
And all the while, Russian forces prepare and train. These the latest pictures from the country's defence ministry showing Russian warplanes patrolling the border of Belarus and Ukraine. James Landale, BBC News.
Well, in a moment, we'll speak to Caroline Davis in Moscow. But first, let's get the latest from the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, and James Waterhouse, who's there. James, is this confusion now cleared up whether or not Ukraine wants to actually join NATO eventually?
Well, Clive, Ukraine's once again reasserted its intent, its long-term goal of joining NATO one day. But what a way to get there. Words matter if you're a diplomat, not least if there's a looming threat of being invaded. That said, Ukrainian ministers know they're not going to be joining the alliance anytime soon. The whole process takes years. One of the conditions is that you can't be at war. The country's been at war for 8 years in the east of the country. And signing up would also put it in direct conflict with Russia. The Kremlin has made that very clear. It's also reacted to this mixed messaging, saying it would welcome a guarantee it would not join, saying it would ease their security concerns. Meanwhile, Ukrainian ministers are focusing on getting security guarantees, trying to shore up agreements with Western allies in what the West at least thinks is a significant week. But joining NATO, well, in the words of the UK's UK ambassador of Ukraine, that's not going to happen by Wednesday.
OK, and to you, Caroline, in Moscow, picking up on James's point there, NATO membership is what Mr. Putin detests. So Ukraine potentially shelving that ambition, could that deter war?
That was certainly what Russia demanded back in December, Clive. But at the moment, hearing from the Kremlin earlier, they said that, yes, if that was on the table, this would alleviate some of Russia's concerns. But they also recognise that this isn't Kiev's position and that the ambassador has had to walk these comments back. In terms of comments from the Kremlin today, we've also seen President Putin holding an open meeting. And during the course of it, a particularly tense moment when he turned to his foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, and asked whether it was worth continuing with the conversations, whether it was worth continuing with these diplomatic efforts. Sergei Lavrov said, yes, it is, and that there are still possibilities on the table, which will be some level of reassurance before we see Chancellor Scholz arrive here tomorrow. But in terms of the language that's coming out of Russia at the moment, even though they acknowledge that the tensions are continuing to increase, no suggestion from this side that Russia is about to try to back down.
OK, Caroline, thank you. Caroline Davis there in Moscow. And to you, James Waterhouse in Kyiv. Many thanks. Well, one immediate knock-on effect of tensions over Ukraine is the rising cost of oil, which today has seen prices at the pumps reach record highs across the UK. The motoring organisation, the AA, says the cost of petrol increased to 148 pence per litre for the first time this weekend. Our transport correspondent, Katie Austin, is here. So, Katie, a direct impact then for all of us of what's going on in Ukraine.
Yeah, well, earlier today, the price of oil hit a 7-year high at about $96 a barrel before falling back slightly. Tensions around Ukraine aren't the only thing that have been pushing up wholesale prices. Another big one is the resurgence in demand as global economies have reopened. But concerns around the potential for conflict have definitely driven those prices up further because of the impact it could have on supply. Now, it doesn't happen overnight, but these increases do feed through into the amount drivers here pay for their fuel at the pump. And motoring groups say that yesterday the average cost for a litre of petrol went above 148 pence, surpassing the previous record high set in November. They say diesel has also recently hit a record high. Now, the RAC is predicting that records could now be set, it says, on a daily basis. It thinks retailers are keen to pass on the wholesale increases quickly, and the AA said the cost of living crisis had been ratcheted up yet another notch. This does come, of course, as households and businesses are facing various cost pressures, with inflation running at a 30-year high and increases to energy bills on the way.
Sure. OK. Katie, thank you. Katie Austin there. A long-awaited public inquiry into one of Britain's biggest miscarriages of justice has just begun hearing evidence. More than 700 post office branch managers were wrongly convicted, and thousands lost their businesses when faulty accounting software made it look as if money had gone missing from their tills and they'd stolen it. Here's Charlotte Gallagher.
A moment for celebration after years of anguish and struggle. Joe Hamilton, here on the right, is just one of the innocent people whose lives were ruined because of a faulty post office IT system. Her conviction was quashed last year, but now it's time for answers from this public inquiry.
I've had a criminal record for 13 years that I didn't deserve, and that impacts on your work, on your finances and everything. My mum and dad aren't here. They weren't here to see my conviction quashed because they both had strokes and died, which I'm convinced was as a result of what happened to me.
In total, 706 former sub-postmasters were convicted for crimes they didn't commit. Slowly, those convictions are being overturned, 72 so far. But thousands more post office staff lost huge amounts of money, so the government will foot the bill for compensation. The IT system at the centre of this scandal is called Horizon, developed by the software firm Fujitsu. Essentially, it couldn't add up properly, so post office managers were accused of stealing sums of money that never existed.
Lives were ruined. Families were torn apart. Families were made homeless and destitute. Reputations were destroyed.
This public inquiry beginning today is aiming to answer these questions. When did it become clear Horizon wasn't working? And why did senior managers keep blaming sub-postmasters when the issues emerged? No one's been held responsible so far. For the victims, the answers can't come soon enough. And there's been emotional evidence so far.
I was the only man who ran the post office 7 days a week. They did not pay me on Saturday, Sunday. I used to open the post office at 8 o'clock in the morning and shut at 8 o'clock at night. Of course, I took permission from the post office because it was such a budding business. I said, I'll work 7 days a week. And I was the only post office in the country which was running all 7 days.
The post office has said sorry to victims, but many people want more than an apology. Charlotte Gallagher, BBC News.
Well, one of those imprisoned after being wrongly convicted was Tracy Felstead, who was sent to Holloway Jail for 3 months when she was just 19. Last year, along with 71 others, her conviction was overturned. Hayley Hassel from the BBC's File on 4 programme has been following her story.
I'm feeling loads of different emotions. I'm scared of what's on the other side of those gates. I'm angry. It needs to be done. It needs to be put to bed.
At the age of 19, Tracy was prosecuted and sent to Holloway Prison for stealing more than £11,000, something we now know was due to a faulty computer system called Horizon. She's come back here today for the first time in 20 years, in the hope that this will somehow help with her recovery.
This is my cell.
This is your cell?
Yeah, that's my bed. I remember saying to a girl I hadn't done the crime, and she said, oh, none of us have. See, you couldn't even protest your innocence in here. Oh, I never thought I could come here.
Tracy spent several weeks in this group cell before being moved to one of her own.
This was my cell, cell 21.
It's now 20 years since you were in this prison. How has your life changed by being here?
Although it's made me the person I am today, it's made me not the person I want to be. I don't want to be that person who is scared of noises, who, you know, it broke my marriage down. It's taken its toll. No amount of money will ever change what's happened. The only thing I can do now is look forward to the next 20 years. I always say to my children, it's never judge a book by its cover. You don't know what somebody's been through. And now I understand that sometimes people are sent to prison for crimes they didn't commit.
Still feel very surreal that I've just done that. I want closure for everybody. People to be compensated, fair and final compensation. We need answers as to who knew what, when and why.
Tracy Felstead's story there, and you can hear more of her life and the problems that she's faced as a result of that conviction in First Class Scandal on BBC Radio 4. That's at 8 p.m. tomorrow night, or at any time on the BBC Sounds app. Well, our Consumer Affairs correspondent Coletta Smith is in central London where the inquiry is taking place. This whole affair is so appalling. What is it that those who are wrongly accused, Coletta, what do they want from the inquiry?
Clive, it's an easy question to answer, and that is accountability, because no one has yet been held to account for what has happened to those individuals from within the post office, from within Fujitsu, who owned the software and sold it to the post office, or indeed the government as a whole. We've heard here this morning at the public inquiry that this is not going to be a dry inquiry into what they describe as an IT project gone wrong, because as you've been hearing, as we have covered so often on BBC News, this is a story about people and the impact that it's had on their lives. Baljit Sethi has been the first witness this morning to begin to give evidence, but it is just the tip of the iceberg. More than 2,000 people lost their businesses, were driven into bankruptcy because of this, and more than 700 were convicted, received criminal convictions. Many, like Tracy Falstead, were sent to prison as a result. And for them, it is not just about getting those convictions overturned or receiving financial compensation, but finding out why the post office held on to that belief that they could still use the software as a basis for conviction, even though there were faults known within that system at the time. That's what this inquiry is trying to get to the bottom of, but it's going to take more than a year before any conclusions are reached.
All right. Coletta, thank you. Coletta Smith there, live in central London. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has confirmed he's received death threats following Boris Johnson's false claim that he failed to prosecute the paedophile Jimmy Savile. Sir Keir had been shielded by police from an angry mob outside Parliament last week and says the Prime Minister's slur has fed into a right-wing conspiracy theory. Police are investigating the online death threats. The World Anti-Doping Agency says it's disappointed by the decision to allow a 15-year-old Russian figure skater who failed a drugs test to continue competing at the Winter Olympics. Kamila Valieva's positive result in December only came to light last week after she'd helped Russia win the team skating event in Beijing. The Court of Arbitration for Sport has ruled that because Valieva's age and the timing of the test result announcement, she should be treated as an exceptional case. Laura Scott has the latest from Beijing.
Cleared to skate, but not cleared of scandal. Kamila Valieva returned to the ice under the scrutiny of the world after the Court of Arbitration for Sport ruled the 15-year-old should be allowed to continue competing in Beijing, despite testing positive for a banned substance.
No provisional suspension should be imposed on the skater. In particular, the panel considered that preventing the athlete to compete at the Olympic Games would cause her irreparable harm.
The panel said a series of exceptional circumstances were behind its decision, including that Valieva is only 15 and the fact that her positive drugs test result came back midway through these games, 44 days after the sample was taken, meaning she had little time to mount a defence. The World Anti-Doping Agency said it was disappointed by the decision because its rules don't allow exceptions to be made to mandatory provisional suspensions, including for minors. Meanwhile, the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee said this appears to be another chapter in the systematic and pervasive disregard for clean sport by Russia.
It is damaging, it's very damaging, but at the same time you want to think that now maybe yet again we're at this point where something will be done in order to make sure that nothing like this can happen again.
The International Olympic Committee announced that there won't be a medal ceremony in the figure skating team event, which was won by the Russian Olympic Committee, including Valieva, and there are other ramifications too.
Should Ms. Valieva finish amongst the top 3 competitors in the women's single skating competition, no flower ceremony and no medal ceremony will take place during the Olympic Winter Games, Beijing 2020.
It is 19 minutes past 1. Our top story this lunchtime. European leaders visit Ukraine and make it clear to Russia that any military action will result in massive sanctions. And still to come, 2 years on from Caroline Flack's death, her mum says she's still sad and very angry at the Met Police's treatment of her daughter.
Coming up in sport on the BBC News channel,
One of the highest profile sporting events in the world, American football's Super Bowl, has been won by the Los Angeles Rams, who beat the Cincinnati Bengals. Prince Harry and Hollywood stars, including Charlize Theron, Jennifer Lopez and Ben Affleck, watched from the stands, along with an estimated global audience of well over 100 million people. Well, for the first time, the event, famed for its halftime entertainment, featured a celebration of hip-hop, with performances from Snoop Dogg, Mary J. Blige and Eminem. Here's our Los Angeles correspondent, Sophie Long.
It was the day LA had been waiting for, as the Super Bowl came back to its birthplace.
We got the Rams, we got the Bengals. Rams, Bengals, Rams.
Rams, baby! Bengals house! Rams, baby! Rams! Rams! Finally, the Super Bowl has come back to Los Angeles!
Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson injected excitement before kickoff. Turns out that wasn't necessary.
Stafford going to the end zone, reaching up and making...
The Rams were first to score and led into half-time. Then, in a matter of minutes, the brand new SoFi Stadium was transformed into a California house party for the first hip-hop halftime show set on a glittering map of Los Angeles. Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg opened. 50 Cent made a surprise appearance, in more ways than one. Mary J. Blige dazzled. Compton local Kendrick Lamar took over. Then the crowd of more than 70,000 lost it to Eminem. It had been billed as the Super Bowl's best ever.
Mary J. Blige killed it. Dr. Dre, Eminem, thank you for representing the culture, and we love all y'all. All y'all are amazing.
Jefferson in motion.
Cincinnati put up a mighty fight. It looked like the trophy would be theirs until the Rams scored a touchdown less than 2 minutes before what became a dramatic, and for the Bengals, heartbreaking end to the game. Well, it was the Hollywood ending that people in the City of Angels had been dreaming of. The Cincinnati Bengals, the Cinderella of the Super Bowl for so long, may have finally made it to the ball, but they are now leaving empty-handed.
It's for the city. It's for the city. Second Super Bowl. Come back, King, baby.
Cincinnati's a good team. We got a lot of years to come. We're going to be a great team in the future.
What an epic game. That last touchdown just really nailed it. It was a phenomenal game.
We're from LA. This is our day.
And one hip-hop and Rams fans will never forget. Sophie Long, BBC News, Los Angeles.
It'll be 2 years tomorrow since the TV presenter Caroline Flack took her own life, a month before she was due to stand trial over the alleged assault of her partner. Her mum, Christine, has always criticised the decision by police to charge her, which the BBC now understands will be the subject of an internal investigation. Our special correspondent Lucy Manning has the story.
Brand new series of Love Island. The wait is finally over.
Caroline Flack. We watched her on screen. But those who really knew her wanted answers about her death. 2 months before the TV presenter killed herself, she had been charged with assaulting her boyfriend. 2 years on, her mother still doesn't have the answers about the way the police treated her.
Do you think she was treated differently because of who she was?
Totally. I just think it was because who she was, yeah.
It was because of she was a celebrity?
Yeah, yeah.
Prosecutors originally said Caroline should just be cautioned, but the Met pushed for the presenter to be charged. The coroner later said she took her own life because she was facing prosecution and feared the publicity.
But it's now 2 years, and I've still not got an answer.
And how does that leave you and the family feeling?
It leaves us really, really sad and really angry because, you know, you want to know why they charged her She couldn't get over that. She couldn't see a way out. And it was down to that.
Her mother put these questions to the Met. She was so dismayed with their response, she complained to the police watchdog. It found the Met's response was not reasonable and proportionate, telling Mrs. Flack, "I do not consider your complaint has been fully addressed." It's ordered the Met to do a proper investigation.
What do you think about the fact that the police watchdog have forced the Met to investigate your queries properly?
I think it's disgusting, but I think it's typical of the Met as we see it now. There's no trust at all. No trust at all.
The Met has said it is rare to give a caution in a case of domestic abuse. The force told us the police watchdog found it had answered 7 areas of Mrs. Flack's complaint, but it had been directed to reinvestigate why it had appealed the decision to caution Ms. Flack. Our thoughts and sympathies remain with Caroline's family, it said. But Mrs. Flack feels her daughter, who had self-harmed that night and had mental health issues, was badly let down.
She was fun. She just had these really dark times. As I say, usually she could get out of it, especially on telly. She loved her job. I'm doing it for Caroline because there was so much negative press around, and it won't bring her back. I know it won't bring her back, but I've got to do it for her.
Caroline Flack's mum there, Christine, talking to Lucy Manning. It's day 10 of the Winter Olympics and Team GB has still to win a medal. It's 30 years since Great Britain returned from the Winter Games empty-handed, and the ambition this time round was 3 to 7 medals. But not all hope is lost, with some promising contenders still to compete. Here's our sports correspondent, Andy Swiss.
Team GB's Kirsty Muir.
10 days, 0 medals. Britain have hardly soared so far at these games, but could Kirsty Muir finally give them liftoff? At just 17, Muir is the team's youngest athlete, but she cruised through to the slopestyle final in 6th place and hopes even better is to come.
Let's go, Kirsty. Solid run for Kirsty Muir from Aberdeen.
I feel like I definitely had a few mistakes in the first run, which I'm hoping to clean up tomorrow, and then not as good in my second, but, you know, honestly, so happy. Yeah, just can't wait for it.
Her teammate Katie Summerhayes also qualified after what's been a desperate game so far for Britain. Just maybe.
Nice.
And so Team GB will have 2 skiers in the final here tomorrow, and with Kirsty Muir in particular, they'll have high hopes of that elusive first medal.
A tied match to the very last stone.
Any other chances? Well, the men's curlers are going nicely, edging out Switzerland in dramatic style.
And he's done it. That's a brilliant shot to finish things off.
The semi-finals are now in their sights. In the ice dance, meanwhile, Britain's Lila Fear and Lewis Gibson skated to the Lion King soundtrack and secured a creditable top 10 finish.
I reckon she's been shopping in Beijing.
But the day's strangest sight, France's Lucille Lefebvre in the big air event, dressed as a tiger. Why? Well, despite being injured, she wanted a final jump before retiring. And although she finished last, at least she went out with a roar. Andy Swiss, BBC News, Beijing.
The film director and producer Ivan Reitman, who made the comedies Ghostbusters, Twins and Kindergarten Cop, has died at his home in California. He was 75. Born in what is now Slovakia, he grew up in Canada, with his big break coming in 1978, producing the comedy National Lampoon's Animal House. Our entertainment correspondent Lisa Mazimba looks back at his life.
Ghostbusters was a phenomenon. When teenagers became cinema's most lucrative audience in the 1970s and 1980s, Reitman had an almost unique understanding of their tastes.
He slimed me.
That's great! His first big success was producing the raucous National Lampoon's Animal House in 1977. The movie, about an out-of-control fraternity, incorporated some of Reitman's own experiences of college and helped begin audiences' tastes for gross-out comedy.
I'm a zit. Get it?
he turned to directing. His working relationship with Bill Murray, which reached its peak with Ghostbusters, began with Reitman directing him in films like Meatballs and Stripes.
Where the hell have you been, soldier?
Training, sir! Training, sir!
What kind of training, son?
Army training, sir! Army training, sir!
He also developed a strong partnership with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Reitman cast him in Junior, Kindergarten Cop, and their first film together, Twins.
My name is Julius, and I'm your twin brother.
Oh, obviously. The moment I sat down, I thought I was looking into a mirror.
Have you missed us?
And last year, he produced Ghostbusters sequel, Afterlife. He was a filmmaker who changed the course of cinema forever.
The film director Ivan Reitman, who's died at the age of 75. Time for a look at the weather news now, and Helen Willits is here. Hi there, Helen.
Clive, I have news of 2 storms that will impact the UK this week. Yep, some very turbulent weather indeed. Named by the Met Office just an hour or 2 ago, Dudley will hit on Wednesday and Thursday, and then Eunice later in the week. And it's because we've got this powerful jet stream driving these deepening low pressure systems towards our shores, and subtle differences on where they will impact as well. And if you're heading out for the rest of the afternoon, you can see quite clearly here we've got some more rain to come, rain sinking south with showers following on behind, with some sunny intervals as well. Quite a chilly wind compared with the weekend, but temperatures actually are doing okay for this time of year. Even with the rain, we're looking at 7 to 10 degrees Celsius. The temperatures really are not the story this week. It's the strength of the wind and, yes, more rain. Briefly drier overnight tonight, and following the rain, we'll see a touch of frost, potentially some ice, but already after midnight, the next weather front is sweeping in off the Atlantic. Hill snow to go with it, and some strengthening winds as well, but certainly not the winds that we're talking about later in the week. So as we start Tuesday, perhaps a little early brightness in the south and east, brighter spells coming through behind, but the rain drags its heels to clear in the south and in the north. Between it, we'll see a few wintry showers, sunny spells, and again, like today, temperatures around 7 to 10 degrees Celsius. But already we've got the next area of rain waiting in the wings, and it will be bands of rain one after the other this week. But it's later Wednesday that we're impacted by the first storm. This is Dudley. Look at the tightly packed isobars. Those straight lines mean some very impactful wind strengths. So during the day on Wednesday, it's wet. We'll see a little bit of snow on the hills, but the winds really escalate later in the day. But look at the temperatures actually, up to 17 in the south. It's a very energetic weather system coming in, so a lot of mild air with it. But this is the orange warning. It encompasses much of southern and central Scotland, highly populated areas here to Northern Ireland and Northern England. Gusts of potentially 90 miles an hour, so bringing down trees, causing disruption to transport, hitting throughout the night on Wednesday and into the start of Thursday. The winds may ease a little later on Thursday. It's still very mild, but we don't get much of a respite before in comes the Eunice. Now this one looks set to impact more of England and Wales, but there's some uncertainty, just a yellow warning at the moment from the Met Office with this system, but easily, again, a very powerful, potentially destructive storm coming in. And to add to it, some potential blizzards in the north, on the northern edge of that low pressure system, with quite significant snow blowing around in those strong winds. Clive, one to stay tuned to, I think.
My word. OK, Helen, thank you. Helen Willis there. And that's it. So goodbye from me. Now on BBC One, let's join our news teams where you are. Have a very good afternoon.